At a school board meeting, people were greeting each other with body parts. The situation was getting worse for Dot and her daughter. She looked like a weak woman, but in fact, her martial arts skills were excellent. When Dot left, she and her daughter taught the math teacher a lesson. They even accidentally injured the police officer who was trying to stop her, so Dot was immediately taken to the police car by other police officers. At this point, she seriously explained that the math teacher had rushed forward in a frightening manner. Because her daughter was with her, it was her subconscious instinct to fight back. This was understandable, and attacking the police was just a small mistake in the wrong place and at the wrong time. However, this policewoman did not give in at all. Dot was quickly taken to the police station to be checked in. Then, she took a photo and had her fingerprints taken. Her information would be entered into the national database. This made Dot, who was in prison, very worried. But not long after, her husband appeared to bail her out. Wayne was a gentle and elegant person. Moreover, he was a rare kind person. It was not enough for Wayne to easily get Dot out of police station, because Wayne also had a rich mother who ran a debt collection company. Then a unique family dinner was about to be held at the villa. Dot's whole family was dressed very luxuriously. At this time, the rich mother, Lorraine, appeared shining from the second floor. Then there would be a family photo session. To reflect their background, everyone even held guns in their hands when taking the photo. Lorraine's seat at the dinner showed her status in the family. Wayne's position was at the end of the dining table. This showed that this family had a tradition of feminism. During dinner, it was inevitable that Lorraine would ask about the accident when Dot attacked police. Dot was then mercilessly laughed at by Lorraine, but the unpleasant dinner soon ended. The family of three returned to their warm home. The next day, Dot was preparing breakfast for her daughter. Wayne had to take Scotty to school early. Dot had nothing to do at the moment, so she chose to knit while watching TV. This leisurely moment was interrupted by the sudden appearance of a masked man. Then another man came to the first floor. The two went up to the second floor together and went to the master bedroom. However, they searched everywhere but found no one there. The only hiding place left was the bathroom. As soon as a man opened the door, Dot sprayed the gas cylinder in his face. Then she threatened another guy to take the opportunity to run away. However, she accidentally tripped and fell down the stairs. When Dot woke up, two thugs were standing behind her. One of them lifted her leg but was immediately punched in the face by her. Dot escaped danger again, but the safe time did not last long. In the end, she was defeated by two strong men. When Wayne brought his daughter home, he saw blood stains all over the house, so he called the police for help. Then he immediately informed his mother about his wife's disappearance. In the eyes of a capitalist mother, cornering must come with evil strings, and the target of blackmail would certainly not be her useless son. After all, he was just a small boss of a car company. Lorraine didn't want to make a big deal out of it, so she decided to keep it private. Policewoman Indira returned home and received an overdue bill. You can imagine that her finances were worrying. She also had a dreamy husband. He just spent money on various equipment to fulfill his golfing dreams. Meanwhile, Dot was kidnapped and was in a moving car. One of them, Ireland, was complaining about his injuries. He wanted to go to the hospital. Dot, who was tied up, took the opportunity to say that the burns were very susceptible to infection. Unfortunately, the leader Munch was very vigilant, so he didn't allow them to go to the hospital. At this time, the car passed a gas station where a police car happened to be standing there, and the car the thugs were driving was a stolen black car. Not surprisingly, the police car chased them, so they pulled over to plan the murder of the police officer. They didn't know that as soon as the car stopped, Dot got out of the car from the back seat and ran towards the police car. But then, two cornerers came out with heavy weapons, causing one policeman to fall to the ground. The other one hid in the car door and asked for help. At this time, Ireland had taken a detour with the intention of surrounding him, but he had already escaped to a gas station not far away. Dot also unexpectedly encountered him there. However, she still coldly rushed into the supermarket. The policeman was still standing in front of the supermarket, not knowing that the thugs were approaching. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out in the darkness, causing Whit to be shot in the leg. So Dot also realized that the thugs were coming here. After Whit was shot, he hid in the supermarket and asked for a first aid kit. Whit helped Dot untie herself. At this point, the thugs had turned off all the lights in the supermarket, but Dot noticed that the supermarket had a back door and a bathroom. First, she poured engine oil in front of the door. Then she threw a fluorescent stick on the floor to light it up. Finally, she took 2 bags of ice and went to the bathroom door. But the window in the bathroom was broken, so the thug might have gone in. So Dot threw out a glow stick for protection and moved the 2 bags of ice. Whit finished bandaging himself. He asked the clerk if he had a weapon for self-defense. But before he could say anything, there was a noise at the door, so Whit opened fire. Meanwhile, the Irishman sneaked into the bathroom by a roundabout way, but he was knocked down by Dot with a bag of ice. Munch, on the other hand, was still very careful when entering the door, because he had noticed the lubricant on his feet. fight. Even when facing the clerk, he was still very calm. Then he jumped out of the barrage of bullets that Whit was shooting at him. But while he was concentrating on counterattacking, Dot sneaked up on him with a stick. However, Whit's cry for help caught Dot off guard, so Dot decided to help Whit treat his wound first. But at this moment, Munch at the door had disappeared. Whit had told Dot that reinforcements were coming and he would definitely report her progress. But when he finished speaking, no one answered because Dot had already run away. Wayne was currently coaxing his daughter to sleep. He had no idea that after he went back to sleep, his wife had returned. When he saw blood on the floor, he thought that the thugs had sneaked in again. However, it was his wife in the kitchen, so he was very happy. It was just that Dot was a little unusual at this moment. Her messy hair and blood on her legs made him quite worried, especially after the police confirmed that it was a kidnapping. However, Dot's reaction left Wayne speechless. She said there was no kidnapping. She was just physically and mentally exhausted, so she went out for a walk. In the morning, Munch went to find the person behind him who supported him financially. The person's name was Roy. He had become the local police chief at the age of 25. Roy's family had lived in this town for generations. He was also a devout man. The traditional thinking in Roy's family was that the husband was the head of the family. The wife had to obey orders and maintain her virtue. For example, when he resolved domestic disputes in the local family, he did not need to listen to the couple's explanation. He could tell by the bruises on his wife's face whether there was domestic violence or not. However, there was no domestic violence. It was within Roy's power to tell his poor wife to go home. As long as she did her duty, her husband had no right to use violence. In other words, if a wife disobeyed her husband, violence was a lesson she deserved. Back at the farm, he was very unhappy because Munch had messed things up. Moreover, Munch had killed a store clerk and a policeman. Munch immediately thought that Dot was not a normal housewife, but a lion. At this time, Roy also explained the reason. That was, Dot was his wife who had disappeared 11 years ago. Because Dot's fingerprints were in the system, Roy was able to find out her current whereabouts. When Munch learned the whole story, he also knew that he was about to lose his life. At this time, Roy asked his son Gator to deal with Munch. But Munch was also a cunning criminal. Munch picked up cigarette butts on the ground to handle the emergency. Just as Gator was about to take action, he was restrained by Munch. Then Munch started shooting and killing the people around. When Roy realized something was wrong and rushed to the scene, Munch had already escaped. At this time, Dot had to face Indira's interrogation at home. She claimed that there was no kidnapping. She was just in a bad mood, so she went out to relax. But the two types of bloodstains recorded in the policewoman's file were difficult to explain. Dot thought that the bloodstains might be a mistake at the hospital, and the two masks on the floor were bought by her earlier. Although the excuse was a bit crude, the victim was determined to drop the case. Wayne also expressed his belief in Dot's nonsense. Even if Indira didn't want to, she couldn't do anything. However, Dot's normal return home was not something that could be overlooked by Lorraine. Dot's excuses were child's play in Lorraine's eyes. Lorraine was sure that Dot had some problem. At this time, Roy had returned to the farm like a local emperor. Gator had found the necessary information. Dot had married someone else a long time ago. Her husband was a car dealer. They also had a 9-year-old daughter. At this time, 2 federal agents came to visit. Roy was in a bad mood, so he didn't seem very happy. He had shown the attitude that a local emperor should have. The United States was a federal system with different laws in each place. In the areas under Roy's jurisdiction, he was the law. The federal system did not work on him. At the same time, when Dot brought her daughter home, she saw Lorraine coming here. Lorraine immediately showed her displeasure with Dot's shady business. Lorraine asked Dot to stay away from her son. Lorraine was willing to pay a large sum of money for Dot to leave Wayne. However, Dot replied that no one could chase her away. Dot even warned Lorraine to sleep with her eyes open if she wanted to fight Dot. Dot's threatening answer made Lorraine feel a little scared and leave. However, Lorraine still had another plan. That was to send the butler Graves to sow discord. Graves said that the night Dot disappeared, inside a supermarket in North Dakota, there was a robber who died in the bathroom. A woman who looked very similar to Dot appeared at the scene. Dot probably directed and acted herself so that they could blackmail her. Unfortunately, Wayne still stubbornly believed in his wife, so Wayne was slapped by Graves. At the same time, Whit was rescued and was in the hospital. Although Dot insisted on withdrawing the complaint, the police officer still had basic professional ethics. The incident at the supermarket last night was closely related to her missing person investigation, so Indira wanted Whit to confirm Dot's photo. Unfortunately, the North Dakota Deputy Sheriff, Gator, came here. The supermarket incident happened in North Dakota, so it was reasonable for Gator to come to the scene to find out what happened. Gator also took the opportunity to delete the only photo of Dot on Indira's phone, because Gator already had enough information about Dot. Dot knew that the second kidnapping was about to happen, so she called on her daughter to take action. They attached broken glass to the door and electrical wires wires to the window and set up a large set of defense equipment that was deployed. By the time Wayne returned, he was overwhelmed by the defense system the two had built. Wayne tried to calm down and talk cheerfully with Dot, but she was very eloquent, so she convinced him that there was no kidnapping. The defense system was to prevent retaliation from the school planning committee, so Wayne forgot the slap that morning and he trusted Dot unconditionally. He was even convinced by her to buy a gun to keep in his bedroom. During the night, Gator and another police officer returned to North Dakota. When he passed by a familiar gas station, he stopped to buy something. The other one, after refueling, had a little accident when Munch appeared and attacked Gator's partner. When Gator finished shopping, he discovered the partner's body in the rearview mirror. At this time, Gator realized that bigger trouble was coming. Roy received a request for help from his son, so he went to the scene. Roy realized that this had something to do with Munch, so Gator took on the task of finding Munch. But Roy not only had a son, he was also blessed with twin daughters. This was a wall full of photos that hinted at Roy's many marriages. The twins were born to his current wife, Karen. Roy had to be busy with official duties even when he was home. It was the arms smuggling business. This explained why higher-level federal agents came to investigate. Dot was now in a state of extreme anxiety, so she took a small ladder to change the sign in front of the house. When the morning came, her daughter made a list of things to buy for the upcoming Christmas. At this time, North Dakota was covered in white snow. There was an old woman with gray hair pulling a cart home with a haggard face. After returning home, she watched TV when suddenly there was a sound from upstairs. When she saw that Munch was living here, she was extremely unhappy, but then she was indifferent and allowed him to stay. At the same time, Dot and Wayne went to the gun store to buy defense equipment as planned. It could be seen that Dot was very knowledgeable about weapons. She spent $5,000 of her husband's money to buy the necessary equipment. Unfortunately, according to the law, they had to wait until next week for the goods. At the moment, Dot could only replace it with a new pepper spray. At the same time, Gator also decided to achieve some achievements to be worthy in Roy's eyes. At this time, Whit had just been discharged from the hospital when he went to see the deceased's belongings. It was the Irishman who died at the supermarket that day. When Whit entered the storage room, he accidentally saw Gator hiding something. The unexpected encounter between the two turned into a dispute. Whit couldn't compete with Gator's unreasonable troubles, so he could only helplessly watch Gator leave. The file box was now empty, but in front of the counter, Whit found Gator's business card. After Whit looked up the information, he knew Gator's background. In the email, he confirmed that the woman who acted bravely was Dot. The police had confirmed the connection between the two cases. However, it was still to be confirmed whether the investigation could continue. In Lorraine's office, Indira and the leader had no information. At the same time, Munch had officially moved into the lonely old woman's house. Although he had a place to live, the revenge process could not stop. On the pillow was the walkie-talkie he had taken to monitor the police's actions. Judging from Munch's expression, he seemed to have something planned. The next day was the much-anticipated Christmas. People would dress up and take to the streets. With a huge crowd, this was a good opportunity to attack Dot's house, so Roy assigned this task to Gator. This time, he brought more capable people to make sure the task was completed. Meanwhile, Roy chose to go to the church to wait for Dot to be captured here. Meanwhile, Roy called and revealed that Dot also had another name, Nadine. 500 years ago, in England, there was a popular profession of cannibals. They volunteered to eat the food of the dead and take on the sins of the deceased when they were alive. At this time, Munch said goodbye to the old woman who let him stay and went to the uncle's cellar on the mountain. He began his worship ritual here. At the same time, Gator's men had arrived. Because the road signs did not match the map, they went around in circles. It took a while, but they finally saw Dot returning home. At the same time, Munch had successfully completed the cult ritual and entered Roy's house. At this point, four strangely masked thugs took action. They were about to experience the adult version of being home alone. Before breaking in, they saw Dot by the oven in the kitchen. After confirming their target, they took action. They didn't need to break in violently because the door was unlocked. Dot was hiding in a secret cupboard and watching. The thugs searched the whole house, but found nothing. It wasn't until the fire alarm went off that they realized something was wrong. At this point, a man on the second floor was attracted by the flashing lights outside the door. After he came out to check, Dot sprayed pepper spray in his face. Then he was kicked down the stairs. The noise attracted the remaining thugs. Dot took advantage of the darkness to rush out and pull the rope, causing the hammer to knock one of them down. Then she turned back from the back door and rushed at him with a stick. But this guy had already reacted. At this time, he took off his mask and revealed himself. It was Gator. But Gator's rude invitation to his house was rejected by Dot. So Gator turned his target to Dot's husband and daughter. And at this time, Dot secretly climbed up the vent. Meanwhile, the thugs had split into two groups. Gator had found a vent in the basement that could be used up and down down. The other two discovered an invisible staircase leading to the attic on the upper floor. But when he opened the ladder, he was immediately knocked down. Immediately after, Dot kicked the remaining guy down the stairs. At this moment, Gator was walking up. Dot then asked her husband and child to hide in the room, but Dot forgot that there was an exposed wire on the window, so Wayne was electrocuted. As a result, the fire fairy burned the curtain. At the crucial moment, Dot was able to clear the way to escape. Then Dot and her daughter helped Wayne out of the window. Dot's daughter, Scotty, went down the stairs smoothly. Only pity for the unconscious Wayne, who was thrown down below so roughly. After escaping death, Dot looked at the blazing fire. She couldn't help but sigh in her heart. Her warm home for more than 10 years had burned down. But because of this fire, Gator didn't dare to stay any longer and brought the injured person back. When Roy returned home in disappointment, he discovered that the doorman had died miserably. Someone had left footprints in the house. Roy immediately picked up his weapon and searched for the killer. There was a warning on the wall in the twins' room. Fortunately, Munch did not kill innocent people indiscriminately. Meanwhile, Dot's family rushed to the hospital. At this time, Indira and Whit were informed that when they checked the supermarket surveillance camera, they saw that Dot was the person in the video. There was a fire in her house last night. Lorraine also received the news during the interview with the reporter, so the interview had to stop. When Lorraine arrived at the hospital, she found Dot safe, but her son was still in the emergency room. Lorraine was extremely angry. Dot asked to take her daughter to a hotel, but Lorraine flatly refused because she could not let her granddaughter wander around outside. The big villa would welcome the two of them. Then two policemen came to talk about the surveillance video and the kidnapping. Dot could not deny it. Dot can't make a big deal out of it anymore. Luckily, Lorraine is here. She has a great lawyer and housekeeper. She can handle any problem. Just then, the nurse comes in to say Wayne is awake, so Dot takes advantage of the situation to leave. Wayne is still not fully conscious, but he remembers he has a wife, so Dot stages another confession drama. She guarantees they will have a new home. Newly appointed federal agents are determined to investigate Roy's wrongdoings. He has two wives who have disappeared inexplicably. It is implied that the first wife gave birth to Gator. Then she mysteriously disappeared in his jurisdiction, plus many cases of unreasonable substances. Such lawless scum must be severely punished. Furthermore, the two agents suspected Roy of supplying weapons to the militia, but their boss was afraid of retaliation from the militia, so he refused to assist in the investigation. This made the two agents force themselves to smile. At this time, they also realized that the fingerprints of the sheriff's second wife appeared in the system. But the real trouble Roy had to deal with was not from the federal agents. His top priority was to solve Munch's assassination problem, but Roy could not find Munch's hiding place, so Roy chose to find someone else to vent his anger. The domestic violence couple who had appeared before were targeted. The bruises on the wife's hand showed that the husband had not changed. In a series of inconsistent words from Roy, he felt very uncomfortable, so he pulled out his weapon to prove himself. Unfortunately, he hesitated for too long and was immediately shot down by Roy. The poor wife who lost her husband will receive monthly benefits. Meanwhile, Dot and her daughter were taken to Lorraine's villa. But the next day, Lorraine had Dot arrested and taken to a mental hospital. Although the process was a bit tortuous, they finally caught Dot. But the arrest did not last long because Dot was not a simple housewife. She took advantage of the situation to attack the caretaker. Then Dot dressed in a nurse's uniform with the intention of escaping. But unfortunately, the doorman was not stupid. He knew what his colleague looked like, so he pressed the alarm. At the corner of the corridor, Dot saw an old woman in a wheelchair, so Dot became a trustworthy nurse. At the same time, Lorraine was receiving a guest. Surprisingly, that guest was Roy. He quickly made it clear that he wanted to see Dot again. Although Lorraine didn't like to see Dot, Dot and her son were still legally married. Moreover, they had a daughter, so Roy's plan to take Dot away was unsuccessful. Lorraine was even willing to give a check to help Roy's re-election campaign. In return, he would just pretend that his wife had died 10 years ago. But it seemed that this negotiation was unsuccessful. When Roy went out, he also met Dot's daughter, but the girl was closely followed by security guards, so she was inviolable. At that moment, Indira also came and said that Dot had escaped from the hospital. Hearing this, Roy informed Gator, who was near the hospital, to start taking action. They would arrest Wayne. Since Gator was a police officer, he could only wait in the car. Only the remaining 3 cowboys went into the hospital, but they did not know that Dot pushed the old woman aside and she was eavesdropping. When she heard the other side wanted to find her husband, she felt something was wrong. At the same time, Gator was waiting at the door and discovered that 2 federal agents had arrived at the hospital. Feeling something was wrong, he quickly went inside. At this time, Dot ran to the room opposite the front door. This patient is trying to curse, but Dot suffocated him with her coat. Then Dot put on her coat and changed the door number and entered her husband's room. Then Dot took Wayne to the bathroom and asked him to lock the door. Not long after, 3 cowboys entered the patient's patient's room, as expected. At this moment, 2 federal agents appeared behind Dot and said they were ready to help her. While Dot was talking to them, Gator passed by. He and his cowboys took the unconscious patient away. So Dot breathed a sigh of relief, holding the agent's business card. Then she escaped through the bathroom window. At this time, Indira was not only there to inform about Dot's escape, but also to question Lorraine, because Lorraine had no right to lock Dot up. Although the policewoman was decent, she also had her own weaknesses. Lorraine owned a legitimate debt collection company. Of course, Lorraine had a way to get information about policewoman's debts. A small policewoman overwhelmed by loans, she was no threat in Lorraine's eyes. Just as they were talking, Dot found her daughter in the heavily guarded villa. Then Dot learned from her daughter that Roy had come here. Dot realized that the villa was no longer safe, so she took her daughter and ran away with her. At this time, Indira returned and found her husband obsessed with golf, so she became increasingly upset. Unexpectedly, when entering Indira's house, she saw Dot and her daughter there. It turned out that Dot came here to ask Indira to take care of her daughter. Dot confessed that Roy was her ex-husband, but he liked domestic violence. That's why she ran away to regain her freedom. Dot didn't want to go back to hell, so she could only beg Indira to keep her daughter for a few days. Indira finally agreed to help Dot. Dot then drove somewhere in the dark. At the same time, Roy also decided to confront Lorraine. Roy met the bank manager that Lorraine wanted to buy. Roy then used force to make the other side give up cooperation. Early the next morning, when Roy was getting his hair cut by his current wife, he saw a Wayne advertisement on TV. Roy realized that Wayne was not the same as the patient that Gator had brought back. So Roy had to rush to the warehouse to confirm with his own eyes. As expected, this was a mistake, and of course, Gator would be responsible for this mistake. Gator had seen the photo of Dot's current family. Unfortunately, due to his poor memory, this mistake had occurred. This had become a small stain on his ability to prove his worth. Roy would not stop at that. His son's ability was not enough, so he could only spend money to find someone to do the job. Roy went to see Munch and apologized to him. The conflict between the two was reduced, and he also received a large sum of money. Just like that, Munch became Roy's right-hand man again. However, his good qualities did not last long. Gator revealed the real purpose of the meeting. Then Gator installed a tracking device on Munch's car. Meanwhile, Indira was having a headache because of debt. Early in the morning, she had to take care of another little girl. Not only did Indira have to go out to work, she also had to deal with her weak-willed husband at home. In addition to his passion for golf, he always wanted his wife to be a good housewife. At this time, Indira went to the hospital to solve the case of a mysterious missing patient. His family was in great pain, but the careful policewoman noticed something suspicious. She realized that the nameplate in front of the ward had been changed. Wayne was now meeting 2 federal agents. They revealed Dot's true origin, and they showed a reasonable willingness to attack Roy. But Wayne was still not cured, so his mind was still very hazy, so the conversation did not work very well. Just then, Indira came over and said that the 2 detectives could talk to her. Then there was evidence of Roy's lawlessness and domestic violence. Hearing this, Indira was very angry, and she was ready to help the victims. But when Indira came home, she found that Scotty had not had food for a day, because Indira's husband did not care about Scotty's existence. Indira realized that her house was not a good place for Scotty to stay, so Indira took Scotty back to Lorraine's big mansion. Then Indira also showed Roy's domestic violence records to Dot. Indira hoped that Lorraine could help Dot. After a series of persuasion, Lorraine seemed to accept. Lorraine gave Indira a job as the manager of her security team. This would help pay off Indira's debt, but Indira was still a little worried, and she needed some time to think. The next day, Graves reported that the bank they were going to buy had canceled the deal. This move disrupted Lorraine's business plan, but Lorraine easily saw that Roy was causing trouble. Lorraine then assigned Graves a mission to disrupt Roy's election. That night, Lorraine called the bank manager and informed him that he would face full federal supervision. At the same time, they would freeze the assets in his name. He had just escaped death from Roy, but he had to spend the rest of his life in pain. This was a fight for money and power. Lorraine had both. Then she looked through the file that the policewoman left on her desk. Inside was evidence that her daughter-in-law was abused by Roy. Meanwhile, Dot was in the car going somewhere. She was exhausted physically and mentally. Luckily, there was a gas station on the way, so she stopped to replenish her energy. Then she ordered a cake from the waiter. Due to tiredness, she closed her eyes for a while. But then, Dot was awakened by a noise. The waiter brought a cake with a smiley face. This marked the beginning of her wonderful journey. When Dot arrived at a deserted place, she took out a tip bill buried in the ground. Based on the clue on the tip bill, Dot found the Utopia sign. When it was dark, Dot finally found a wooden house deep in the forest. Inside it was brightly lit because a strange puppet show was being performed. She watched the puppets on the stage being beaten over and over again, as if she saw herself in it. Soon after, Dot fainted from exhaustion. When she woke up, there was a woman sitting next to the forest. At this time, she learned that that there was a group of women who had experienced unfortunate experiences living here. They escaped from worldly conflicts and lived in seclusion in the mountains and forests. The person Dot was looking for was probably the founder of this camp. People call it a holy land. It's like a dream paradise. Women are independent in a world without men. They have plenty of free food and clothes. The founder of this paradise is waiting in a hut not far away. She is wearing glasses and looks kind and approachable, but Dot unreasonably causes trouble by slapping her as soon as she walks in. It seems that the two of them are related. It turns out that this respectable woman is Roy's first wife, Linda. Dot's purpose in going to visit is to lead Linda to correct Roy's countless crimes. Unfortunately, it backfired. The founder of this camp cannot leave. The two sides cannot argue, so they can only hold a trial. A referendum will decide whether they stay or leave. The interesting thing about this experiment is that Dot needs to make a puppet. She uses it to tell her own experiences. This helps the audience immerse themselves in the scene to make a more informed decision. But Dot feels that the puppet buying program is too absurd. Dot is a little reluctant, so she tries to convince Linda at dinner. Unfortunately, she still carelessly says that the trial is an indispensable part. Meanwhile, Gator is determined to become the successor approved by his father. He had previously installed a tracking device on Munch's car. Now he takes advantage of the night to find his target. Very quickly, Gator finds the house where Munch lives and a vague figure on the second floor. Gator immediately takes out his sniper rifle and shoots without hesitation. Unfortunately, the person Gator shoots is the son of the old lady he lives with. It turns out that he came in the morning to ask for money for living expenses. This scene was seen by Munch. Munch gave him the money, but when he just left, he was attacked from behind by Munch. At this time, Gator thought that the job was done, so he needed to get the tracking device out from under the car. Then he saw the bag of money was still in the car. Gator immediately broke the car window to get it back. At this moment, the old woman realized, so there was a struggle between them. Unfortunately, the old woman's body could not withstand even the slightest push. Seeing this, Gator panicked and ran away. After that, Munch was very angry because he had considered the old woman as his new mother. Meanwhile, Dot could not sleep, so she started making her own little puppet. The show had begun. The curtain opened on the image of the innocent little girl lying in the forest. Then a pack of wolves appeared, and she could only run away in panic. When she ran into a supermarket, she was adopted by a woman wearing glasses. Then she was taken home. There were two people in the new home. At that time, the girl was only 15 years old, and the adoptive father's eyes were extremely strict. At the dinner table, they suggested that she should not go to school because they would teach her lessons at home. When night fell, the place became unrecognizable. The mother's situation was difficult. No one in this family could resist the patriarchy, and this was just the beginning of everything. While studying math, the father reached out to the girl. Just before the mother returned home the next day, the father said that he would always be the master of the house. No matter what happened, no one in this family could help her. Even if the mother returned home, the situation became worse, until one day the mother disappeared. So she also ran away from home in the middle of the night. But she was caught and became the new wife of her foster father. The puppet show ended. Dot received support from the audience, and Linda also agreed to leave with Dot. In the car, Linda sincerely apologized for leaving home. Dot also expressed her understanding, so she just sighed. Dot also hoped that they would escape together in the future. Dot was even more grateful when Linda stood up to testify. At this moment, Dot suddenly opened her eyes, and she still saw herself in the restaurant. The whole experience at Utopia was just a dream. When Dot was about to leave, a truck slippery with snow crashed into a nearby car. Dot was hit by the accident and lost consciousness. When she woke up, she found herself in a hospital bed. The nurse told her that only one person was admitted to the hospital. Dot. Moreover, her husband was always with her while she was in a coma. Then she went out and called someone. Dot thought it was her current husband, but the person who entered was Roy. His appearance made her tremble with fear. As soon as Dot was discharged from the hospital, meeting Wit brought a ray of hope. Dot signaled with her eyes for help, but unfortunately, there were more of them, so Wit could only watch Dot being taken away by a group of rough men. Wit immediately called for support from Indira. Her specific location was at the farm where she used to live. It was a pity that she was no longer the boss here. She was locked in the barn with chains. Dot tried to convince Roy that she was no longer the 15-year-old girl that day. She had fallen in love and married her man and had a daughter. But these words only made Roy angrier. However, it was time for him to go to the polls, so Dot was trapped alone in the warehouse. She started to remove parts from the spring bed to find a way to escape. At the polling place, Roy stepped onto the stage with great confidence. Before that, Graves had chosen 3 candidates from the debtors at Park Dakota of the company and asked them all to change their names to Roy Tillman. So Roy had 3 more competitors on the election stage. They acted humorously to interrupt Roy's speech. This made Roy angry and hurt others. The election campaign failed. Graves was very satisfied and drove away. At the same time, Gator had found the warehouse where Dot was being held. She took this opportunity to show her kindness. She said that his mother did not leave home voluntarily. Moreover, she still missed him in her heart. When Gator heard that his mother was still alive, it was like a bolt of lightning. Although he was a little shaken, he still chose to be his father's good son. Then Gator met Wit waiting outside the door, so Gator warned Wit to leave. At this time, Gator did not know that there was a person sitting in the back of his car. At the same time, Wit met Graves at a gas station. When Graves heard about the kidnapping, he hesitated to inform Lorraine and dealt with it himself. At this time, Roy lost the election, so he also went home with his new wife. She said provocative words. Dot's presence caused the recent bad luck. After Roy got out of the car, his face showed anger and he headed towards the warehouse. At this time, Dot heard the noise, so she quickly put away the lockpick. But only then she was lying on the deathbed with a wound on her face. When Roy felt a little relaxed, Dot immediately counterattacked and put the chain around his neck. While they were struggling, the guard came in and announced that Graves had arrived, so the torture had to be temporarily stopped. At this time, Indira returned home and discovered that her husband was having an affair with another girl. Misfortunes often come at the same time. When Indira stepped out, her car was towed away by the debt company. She still had to continue her work. That night, Indira went to Lorraine's villa and told him that Dot had been kidnapped. At this moment, the butler's phone rang at the farm gate, but he did not answer. As the right-hand man of the family, he knew that everyone was equal before the interests. Graves said he could make 3 candidates suddenly disappear. Through that, Graves could help Roy rebuild his reputation, because winning the election was a piece of cake. Unfortunately, Graves came at the wrong time, because Roy was very angry at the moment. As a result, Roy did not hesitate to pick up the gun and shoot. Graves's body was then dragged into the hole near the windmill. It was unknown how many people were buried here. Dot watched from afar and was stunned, because her only hope of rescue was gone. Meanwhile, Munch had kidnapped Gator to a remote ice fishing cabin. Here he began to avenge the old woman Gator had killed. At this time, Dot still did not sit still and wait to die. She tried to reach the nail on the crossbeam when the wooden floor cracked and she fell down. According to the crack, there was something underneath. At this time, Roy outside was more alert about his impulsiveness last night when he killed Graves. Roy had asked the soldiers to be ready because the federal government would come knocking sooner or later. For Dot, they should end everything here by killing her. But when the subordinate went to carry out the order, the warehouse was empty. He did not know that under the wooden plank there was a space big enough to hide. Duff had found a lockpicking tool carefully. At this time, Lorraine also realized that Graves was missing, but Lorraine had prepared for the worst. Since Indira had become the head of security, she was no longer tied down by that useless husband. Lorraine had determined that Graves' last known location was at Roy's farm. Therefore, Lorraine directly sent the FBI and police to the place. At the same time, Wit, who was waiting near the farm, also received a notice from Indira. Roy on the other side was not sitting still. He had recorded a video calling all the local militia and his current wife's father. That was the head of the militia. Not long after, convoy drove into the farm. The twins were temporarily taken away from this place first. At this time, Dot had escaped from the warehouse and was sneaking around the farm, but she had not left yet and went to explore Roy's lair. She quickly caught sight of the phone, but there were many guards here, so she went to the second floor. Luckily, there was a phone in the bedroom, so she called Wayne. But while they were talking, the current wife came in with a gun. She hated Dot very much because Roy never forgot Dot, so she became a substitute and was beaten very often. As the weaker party, Dot could only try to persuade Karen with words. Taking advantage of Karen's mental struggle, Dot easily defeated her. Then Dot went into the kitchen from the secret passage in the cupboard and turned on the gas. Finally, she put on her hat and disguised herself and ran away to a deserted corner. Dot called Indira. Indira immediately gave the phone to Lorraine. During the conversation, the relationship between the two improved. Lorraine also learned that the housekeeper had unfortunately passed away, so the two had a common grudge that needed to be resolved. Lorraine informed Dot that the government had taken action. At this time, Roy returned to find the house filled with gas, so he stopped his subordinate in time to light the fire. Roy knew that Dot had escaped, so he immediately searched around the house. When Roy went to Gator's room, he saw Munch's money bag in the closet, so he realized that his son had met with something bad. It was true that Gator was being tortured by Munch. At this time, the federal army had gathered in front of the farm. Meanwhile, Roy still wanted to find his ex-wife. Dot was currently at the mass grave. She was pulling the switch and climbing inside. Not far from there, 3 cowboys were approaching the grave. Roy had chosen to go to the air raid shelter alone. After a preliminary inspection, he came out and met an acquaintance. It was Gator, who was tied here by Munch. Fortunately, he was very principled and did not kill innocent people indiscriminately. Munch had declared that the feud between him and Roy ended here. After Munch left Gator, he disappeared. When Roy realized realized that his son was disabled, he carelessly turned around and left. At this time, the federal forces had arrived, including Whit. At the same time, the three cowboys who had approached the target noticed someone hiding underneath. Sure enough, when he opened the large iron box, he saw Dot underneath. At the crucial moment, a gunshot rang out, killing the cowboy. It was not police, but Munch who had come here. He was truly a principled person who would help when he saw injustice. He staggered into the bomb shelter. He finally crawled out of the hole according to his senses. However, the federal army was already waiting in front. At this time, Roy did not care about the relationship between father and son. At this time, he was listening to the earnest words of his wife's father. After the words, he became angry and attacked ruthlessly. This scene was accidentally seen by Karen. When Roy chased after him to turn off the clue, Dot was in front and opened fire. This shot attracted the attention of police. Soon after, Whit's team arrived. Roy took advantage of the chaos to escape. Although he was seriously injured, he still ran very fast. Seeing that, Whit followed the blood trail and chased him to the bomb shelter. At this time, Roy was hiding behind the door, waiting for an opportunity to attack. Whit realized in time, but he still could not avoid the knife in Roy's hand. Roy then tried to run away, but fell into a federal ambush. At this time, Gator was rescued. Gator and Dot put aside all conflicts and became family again. But the federal agent had the bad news that Whit had died in battle. But the sadness was soon soothed by the joy of family reunion. Two strong women became a loving family. In the blink of an eye, a year had passed. Today was Whit's death anniversary, and they came to visit him. Inside the federal prison, Lorraine met Roy. He sat down with a smile on his face, showing that life here was still very good. However, Lorraine came here to destroy Roy's perfect life. First, she told him that there was no hope of appealing to the court. The beautiful life in the court would end today, because Lorraine has set up a fund to provide money to prisoners by paying off their debts to torture Roy, so his life will become more colorful. At the same time, the uninvited guest who came to Dot's warm house is Munch. The purpose is for Munch to take revenge on Dot because she beat him in their first meeting. But Dot challenges Munch's concept of debt, and she offers him a meal if he helps her cook. Dot teaches Munch to make cookies and joins her family for dinner. Then Munch shares other problems that have troubled him for many years since taking on the sins of another man. But Dot assures Munch that he can be free by eating a meal made with love and given for free. After a moment of hesitation, Munch eats it and smiles happily. The movie is over here. Goodbye, and see you in the latest videos.